Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in the First Responder Resiliency Echo program. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces and new faces. Please go ahead and turn on your video if you have the ability to do so. We have a packed program today. And so I wanted to just give brief introductions. We're going to start with training in the use of naloxone from Dr. Joanna Katzman. The use of naloxone is critical for first responders to understand and to know how to administer well. And we are very fortunate that the other Dr. Katzman will be able to talk about that. Dr. Joanna Katzman is a professor at the University of New Mexico. She is the director of the Pain Center at the University of New Mexico and has been the director of public health and pain and opioid use programs at Project Echo, and spearheaded many programs in community development, including this one. So we are very indebted to Dr. Katzman. We'll hear from her for 10 minutes, and following that, we are very fortunate to get to hear from our guests, Linda Grabby and Elaine Miller Karas. And I will talk to you about who they are after we hear from Dr. Katzman. They will be talking to us about a community resilience model and actually providing us with some direct training. So, Joanna, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And I think Paige and our great team is going to share the slides. Next slide, please. Well, thank you everyone for allowing me to just even very briefly in less than 10 minutes, just to provide you with some very important information about naloxone, which, as most of you know, is a direct antidote to all types of pure opioid agonists, and it is the best way to actually respond to an opioid overdose as it is happening. It is what has really helped recover and respond to actually millions of lives in the United States, and New Mexico is no different. Next slide. I have no conflicts. For our first responder program, which started actually over a year ago before the pandemic began, we really began our first responder program to really help to train law enforcement, paramedics, and firefighters across New Mexico in substance use disorder and chronic pain. And so teaching our colleagues about naloxone and opiate overdoses is one of the critical aspects of this echo, and for all frontline responders. And as many of you know, and as I shared about a month ago, the epidemics of substance use disorder and chronic pain have literally gone through the roof during the COVID pandemic. So I'm going to share with you key characteristics of an opiate overdose and how you might need to use naloxone for a loved one, a neighbor, and even a stranger. Next slide. As you can see, beginning in about 20 years ago, we've had a huge uptick in opiate overdoses in the United States. Opiate overdoses now exceed all other forms of accidental injury in the United States, including gun violence deaths, car accidents, and other types of accidental injury. And the leading cause of opiate overdoses now is fentanyl and synthetic analogs, even ahead of heroin and prescription opioids, which have actually gone way down. What I also want to mention, even though it's a byproduct of this talk, is that methamphetamine and other stimulants such as cocaine are going way up in this country as leading causes of overdose death. Next slide. So how bad is the opiate overdose epidemic? As I mentioned in the previous slide, it has killed more people, and about 130 people die every day in this country from an opiate overdose death. And as you can see, it's It's the leading cause of accidental injury in the United States, and including the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Next slide. So, and then if you can just complete this whole slide, that would be great. New Mexico, where we're situated right now physically, are most of our hub team, but not all of them. New Mexico really has led the country in terms of laws pertaining to naloxone. In 2001, New Mexico was the first state to enact a law to be able to distribute naloxone. And in northern New Mexico, we still have the highest rates of opiate overdose deaths in the country, despite the fact that in Appalachia and in the Northeast and in Ohio and in some counties in Utah, they still have very, very high rates now of opiate overdose. But in Rio Arriba and Mora counties, we still have the highest rates of opiate overdose death. But in 2001, we were leading the country at this time, and we enacted a law that made it so we could distribute naloxone in the streets. In 2007, New Mexico was the first state to enact the Good Samaritan law, meaning anybody could go and aid a person that was actually in the process of dying from an opiate overdose without the civil liability or damages of trying to aid this person or patient from dying in the streets or in someone's house. That is, there's still caveats in New Mexico, but many other states have gotten rid of certain caveats, meaning if you're trying to aid someone, but you have an arrest warrant out, it is possible that if law enforcement come, you might be held liable. New Mexico also has a standing order for naloxone, meaning anybody can go to any pharmacy and ask for naloxone. You do not have to be the patient. You could be the patient's family member, a stranger, and you should be able to just ask for naloxone and be able to get the medication. And then in July of 2019, we're the first state in the country, New Mexico was the first state to enact a co-prescribing a naloxone order, meaning that when you or I might say that in 2017, we had a co-prescribing naloxone law passed, meaning that law enforcement officers on active duty need to carry naloxone. Addiction clinics need to actually give out take-home naloxone. And if you are in jail and you're leaving jail with an opiate use disorder, you need to be given take-home naloxone. And then in July of 2018, naloxone in New Mexico, as with many, many other states, is now required with first-time opiate prescriptions. Next slide. So what are some overdose prevention tips that you might tell your patients, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your family members? Take opioid medications as prescribed and only as long as needed. We now know new studies that even 3 days of taking an opioid might give some patients, especially with those with a genetic predisposition, an increased risk of becoming habituated, but at more risk, addicted to prescription opioids. And then later, if they can't get the prescription opioid, go on to use street drugs like heroin or synthetic fentanyls. Look up prescription opioids, dispose of excesses. There's many DEA hosted take-back days in your local town. You can look on the local website from City Hall or your local law enforcement to see where you can take back drugs. Remember, you cannot bring controlled substances and opioids back to your local doctor or clinician. And do not use opioids alone. That is the most risky way where people can actually lose their life if using alone. Next slide. So what does an opioid overdose look like? Patients don't die suddenly if taking an opiate overdose. They actually don't die in seconds or minutes. They actually usually die over hours. Patients will usually appear unusually sleepy. Their breathing will become more slow or become absent. Their heart rate will become slower, or their blood pressure will get lower. Their skin will become cold and clammy. Pupils will become tiny, and nails and lips will become blue. Next slide. And so how do you respond to an opioid overdose? Yes, if you could just ask the person, are you okay? In a loud, clear voice, gently shake them for responsiveness, see if they're breathing, and then have a person nearby call 911, or you call 911 if there's no one else nearby. If you see signs of an overdose, immediately administer naloxone. If you have the nasal Narcan, the nasal naloxone, immediately use this form of naloxone. If you have the intramuscular form of naloxone, use that. If they're unresponsive after 2 to 3 minutes, administer the second dose while you're waiting for 911 to arrive. Whatever you do, don't leave the person who's undergoing the opioid overdose. Wait till 911 gets there. Next slide. You have to try to get the patient in a recovery position where they're on their side, so they're not going to, if they aspirate, they're not going to get a pneumonia, and they should be in safer situation on the floor. Next slide. Again, ask your pharmacist about how to get naloxone. Next slide. And here are some references. One thing I just wanted to mention is that if you are physically in New Mexico, if you're residing in New Mexico as a clinician, a law enforcement, firefighter, paramedic, really anybody in New Mexico, you are eligible to get a free kit of naloxone. And Paige Menking, one of my partners in crime, is going to come on right now and just mention a few more items, and then I'm so excited to hear from Linda and Elaine. So here's Paige. Thank you for your time and patience with me.
Before Paige, quick question, Joanna. Dr. Liz Lawrence chatted in, do you recommend that every clinician carries naloxone with us? Seems like a good question.
Absolutely, yes. And if you ask my colleagues, Dr. George Commercy or Dr. Snehal Bhatt, I certainly recommend it, and so does Snehal Bhatt, who runs the UNM Addiction Center. If anybody knows me, they know that I have it in my car and a couple places in my house, and a couple of times I've almost used it in Albuquerque. So I'm a big advocate for the idea of universal precautions. And if anyone's interested in a future talk on that and talking about more about naloxone and how it can help, I'm certainly be happy to. When does naloxone, would you like me to answer any other questions?
Sure. When does the naloxone expire, and how long after it expires can patients continue to use it?
Yes, great question. It has a 2-year, it has a, on the kit, it has a 2-year half-life. It's given, it has 2 doses. So the nasal Narcan preparation, which is nasal naloxone, which is one of the formulations. You can use 1 spray and then in each nostril, and then kind of the kit is done. Patients who are on high doses of methadone, patients who are on large doses of, have used a lot of heroin, patients who have very, very high doses of opioid analgesics might need a 3rd dose of naloxone to fully waken them up. And that's one reason also not to tell patients or their family members or friends not to leave them. So that's one caveat. That's why some people even carry 2 kits around, or some people who use drugs do carry 2 kits with them. But it has a 2-year shelf, supposedly 2-year expiration date. It does have a 2-year expiration date on the kit, but so that's what that's kind of my formal, what I would formally say, but many naloxone people in the know that it is effective for at least 6 months or a year after that. But what I would say is that.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another question in the chat. multiple questions coming, but we got a hard stop for time here. So I'm going to turn to Paige, and then at 2:20, we're going to turn to Linda and Elaine.
Dr. Katzman, I will answer these questions for Patricia and Sharon.
Great, thank you.
Great. Yeah, I was going to say I can answer the first one in the chat.
Okay.
If you'll get the second one. So I just wanted to reiterate, thank you again, Dr. Katzman. Just wanted to reiterate that we can provide a free naloxone kit to folks who are in New Mexico. So if you are interested in getting one of those kits, please send us an email. I'm going to put the email in the chat. It's at chwecho@salud.unm.edu, or you can reply to the first responder email from this morning and we'll get it that way as well. So please just send your mailing address to us so we can get those sent off to you. And that is made possible by a grant from the Department of Health here in Albuquerque, or here in New Mexico. So just wanted to reiterate that. And I did put a link in the chat for you to check the policies around naloxone in your own state as well. And so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Joanna Katzman, very, very much. And questions can continue and we can chat those answers. We're now going to turn to some other very distinguished guests from Emory. We're gonna, oops, I just lost, one sec. All right, we have with us some people to talk to us and to help us learn the community resilience model that they call CRM. And that's Linda Graby and Elaine Miller-Karras. And if I'm mispronouncing your names, please, when you start, correct me. So Dr. Graby is a board certified family nurse practitioner and psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. And her clinical expertise is in primary care, mental health care for homeless or incarcerated women and youth, and in providing this community resilience model training in group settings like ours. Her interests include trauma-informed care, the neurobiology of trauma and resilience, social justice, and social determinants of health. And she is a clinical assistant professor at Emory University's Neil Hodgson Woodruff School of Nursing and a healthcare provider with community advanced practice nurses. Elaine Miller-Karras is MSW-CSW, is the co-founder and director of innovation, vision, and creativity for the Trauma Resource Institute. She is author of the book, Building Resiliency to Trauma, the Trauma and Community Resiliency Model, which I will now get myself, and maybe others might want to get a copy. She has worked internationally to bring healing to the world's community. Her models to date have been brought to 102 countries in Asia, Africa, North America, the Mideast, South America, England, Ireland, and Europe. She's a recognized international speaker and author and has presented the Community Resiliency Model at the Skoll World Forum and the United Nations. Her book was selected recently by the UN Curated Online Library as one of the innovations that can help meet the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals. So with that, we were to get going here at 2:20. I am going to turn it to Dr. Graby and Elaine Miller-Karras, and please correct me if I'm saying your names wrong. And I know you've been with us since the get-go of this program, and we just are honored that you are going to work with us today and next week. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And you've got our names right.
Awesome.
So Elaine, go
Yes.
for it.
Okay, why don't you go to the next slide? And what we'd like to start with is the community resiliency model. Here are the objectives, and we're not going to read them all out loud, but they're there for you to peruse, and you got a copy of these. So the next slide, the community resiliency model is a trauma-informed and, most importantly, a resiliency-informed and focused set of wellness skills. And we have gone all over the world with the model, and one of the questions that we often start with when we're working in community is what or who is helping you the most right now? What's helping you get through? So we'd like to pause for just a second as we get started. We call it a resiliency pause. And what is your response to that question? And I'm going to invite you to put it in the chat. I am going to put mine in the chat and I'll say it out loud. Mine would be my family, my granddaughter, and my dog, Charlie. Not necessarily in that order all the time. Sometimes my little non-human person is the one who fills my heart when I might be upset with the others. So I'm going to invite you to put that into the chat right now. And I'm going to read some of them out loud as they're coming in. My roommate, my spouse, my faith, my dogs, walking, crafts, painting, husband, my partner, baking, cooking, son and 3 dogs. Oh my goodness, yoga, colleagues, being outdoors. You can see they're so individualistic, and we've certainly seen that all over the world as we've gone, because we often ask the question, what else is true besides the hardship that we've seen many people face as we've gone around the world after natural and human-made disasters. So over to you, Lindy.
And Liesl is trying to get in right now. We all carry a number of burdens through life. And if you're familiar with the term ACEs, it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there's really solid evidence that most of us, providers, and first responders, general public, the majority of us have had family adversity, and that's represented in the tree here. Lots of stuff on the CDC website about this. But we also know that the social determinants of health have a lot to do with the burden of trauma that people carry. So neighborhood violence, structural racism, historic racism are the soil under the tree. And then finally, we have just this incredible rate of natural disasters happening, with the pandemic being the biggest, and that is affecting all of us. So we know that the pandemic and also the current social justice movements and our political situation incurs so many challenges around fear of getting sick, the anxieties, the financial problems. So you've seen these, and I think we are all are affected in some way. But the community resiliency model, and we'll just call it CRM, are a set of resiliency skills, which are really all about emotion regulation, which probably is the most critical factor of resiliency. And so we're here to explain some of the rationale behind the model, and then also the skills. They may be very helpful to you. It's a self-care model, but you can turn around and use them with consumers and clients and patients. So this grew out of a series of environmental disasters, and Elaine is the developer of the model, and she was in the earthquakes in both Haiti and China. And there was research that came from some of these disasters, including Katrina, the tsunami, and hurricanes, where there wasn't time to use a more cognitive approach with victims of disasters. And so they could learn, however, the emotion regulation skills that were used in body-based psychotherapy. There's no time for psychotherapy, but they could learn these skills, and actually they had lower rates of PTSD. And it appears to be helpful across age and cultural groups. There are 6 skills. We are going to talk about resourcing and tracking is fundamental to all. And that's about reading body sensations. So this is not a cognitive model, top down. This is a bottom up model. So completely different from what you may have seen before. The critical concept is the resilience zone. So this is your bandwidth of stress tolerance, and we all have an internal resilience zone. You may be happy, your best self there, but not necessarily. You could be irritable and sad, but basically you're functional. So you get along with people, you can learn and think clearly. We like to be in our resilience zone. This curvy line represents the activity in the autonomic nervous system. So we have sympathetic discharge and parasympathetic. So it's like this automatic part of our nervous system has an accelerator and a brakes. So here's where we need energy. So our heart rate goes up, blood pressure, because we need that energy. We need blood and oxygen to our brain and our muscles. And then when we can, we restore, and that's in the parasympathetic mode. So CRM is all about finding techniques to get into this parasympathetic restoration, even when we're really stressed. So this will have an effect to widen your resiliency zone over time. And it's techniques that you can use if you get booted out of the resilient zone, you can get back in. Some people have a very narrow resilient zone, and we all have a narrow zone if we're tired or hungry or in pain. When you teach this, I think the patients I've taught see that, you know, she gets knocked out of her resilience zone and so on. Some people are blessed with a wide resilience zone. They're lucky people. And we all can widen our zone, and there's all kinds of ways to do that. And I'm sure some of you are already doing that. And specifically yoga and meditation may be very helpful, mindfulness. There's just they have parallel activity in the, but opposing activity, the accelerator and the brakes. And we teach homeless youth, and they totally get this. So it's a pretty easy model to explain to people. The only little piece that we can control here is pretty much the breathing rate, which is why so much of mindfulness and meditation focuses on that. Well, what happens is we get overwhelmed sometime by stress or trauma. Now, this lightning bolt could be something witnessed. It could be something like an assault that happens to you. It could be cumulative, like ongoing microaggression or bullying. It throws off this natural rhythm. When we're in that natural rhythm, it's like our brain and body are in sync, and all of our brain is in sync as well. So the pattern gets to be erratic, and you can get pushed into a hyper aroused state, too much sympathetic, or a hyper aroused state, too much parasympathetic. And you can be stuck out there, and it does not feel good. Nobody likes to be there. So up here, we feel edgy, irritable, anxious. And down here, we're more like cut off, exhausted, and even dissociated at an extreme. So this, we have lots of approaches for getting back into the zone, some of which are healthy, like having a good friend over, or eating a good meal, or watching a funny movie, or journaling. But people also engage in a number of maladaptive, unhealthy kinds of behaviors that can lead to more problems. So our responses and reactions to stress and trauma are cognitive, they're emotional, they're physical, they affect our relationships and our life. And pretty much here is the big one, which is behaviors. So we see fighting, self-injury, and eating disorder. And the big one is substance use, which is on the upswing as part of the COVID epidemic.
All right, so I'm going to move us into learning the skills. We are really doing this in a fast track way, aren't we, Lindy? 20 minutes is, I think, a record. So tracking reading sensations is really pivotal to this model. I like to think of that we have 3 portals of information that come to us as human beings: what we think, what we feel, what we sense. And so this model helps people understand the very important aspect of sensations, and how when they start to read their nervous systems, they can actually, and I've seen it all over the world, which always excites me, that people can learn to tell the difference between sensations of distress and sensations of well-being. And once they can do that, with intentionality, they have a choice of what to pay attention to. And I often use the metaphor of a garden. If you only watered the weeds in the garden, they just grow all over the place. But if you start cultivating, the vegetables and the fruits and the well-being that exists inside each one of us as human beings, then brain science tells us that neuroscience, that brain cells that fire together wire together. So the model is also based on neuroscience, and I like to think about it as an application of neuroscience that individuals can have in their hands ready to go. So here's what I just said. So let's go to the next slide. Got ahead of myself there. So tracking is noticing and paying attention to what is happening inside your body at the present moment. And so some of the questions we ask are very simple. What are we noticing on the inside? And is that sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So that's simply the basic kind of recipe of beginning to learn about the nervous system and how it can be a great assistance to us. If we've had trauma in our lives, sometimes what we have been most focused on is the beating drum of the trauma sensations in the body. So as people learn to read the nervous system, they can actually intercept what we call like the hijacking of the nervous system when you get stuck in the high or low zone. So next slide, Lindy. So this was a study that was done in Finland, and I was so excited when I saw this study because it was essentially a person, and I can't pronounce her name, but the citation's on the bottom. First of all, sensation is a physical experience in the body, and we have sensations that originate in billions of receptors that are distributed all over the body. And so what we learned is what we think and what we feel have corresponding sensations in the body. And this is what this study demonstrated. And if you even look at, for example, happiness. So the subjects were shown, I believe, a series of films, and then they had composite drawings, and they were asked to color places that you can see the yellow was the more energy. So if you look at love and you look at happiness, also anger, there was a lot of energy there too. But if you ask them, what were they thinking? And let's say they were thinking about someone they loved, and you go, what do you notice on the inside? And it was most likely it was well-being. So in any event, it's important that research is beginning to show us that the sensory experience connected to thinking and feeling is very important for us to pay attention to. So if we go to the next slide, Lindy, we help people cultivate sensation words, and we're going to hopefully help you today start thinking about the sensation words that are connected to one of your resources. So the best way that I've learned taking this around the world is that we all have, usually most of us have templates of things that that give us strength, that experiences in our life where we felt a sense of well-being. And so if we can call them up, and then we can then alternatively think about the sensation and experience the sensation in our body, then that can actually amplify, almost like saving it to our hard drive, the experience of well-being. So if you go to the next slide, so the best way to learning about sensations, I found, is through a resource. So next slide. And resources can be anything. And when we started with that resiliency question, what I'm going to invite you to do right now is to call up the answer to the question, what or who is helping you the most right now? And as you call whatever that is up right now, and to think about it for a few moments and maybe even add some details about it. Like if I was going to tell you about my granddaughter, she's 4 and she's lively and spunky and she loves to play junior Monopoly. And when I think about her, some of you may notice that I got taller. I can sense the well-being in my entire, kind of my core. And I also feel right now a sense of warmth because I'm also reading the temperature of my body when I think about her. So what I'm going to invite you all to do now is to call it up with detail and to notice the sensations. You can keep your eyes open or closed, whichever is more comfortable for you, as you call that up. And as you do that, I'm going to invite you now to put in the chat what you may have noticed. And also I want to say, there's no right or wrong way to experience your sensations. They just are. So if you can, I noticed, for example, I took a deeper breath when I thought about my granddaughter. And I'm going to type that in right now. So opening in my chest, warm sensation in chest and able to breathe deeper. I smiled and felt happy. Deeper breath, shoulders down, forehead relaxed, happiness. And so I'm going to ask any of you that name an emotion, where do you notice that happiness on the inside? Calm, gentle, relaxed, warm, deeper breath. And also sometimes we pay attention, we can notice the exhaustion we may be feeling in our body. And so that happens as well. Tension releasing in my neck, base of skull. So if we go to the next slide, and you can keep putting information into the chat about that, but I'm going to talk a little bit more. A resource can be anything. So it can be a person, place, thing, memory, a part of yourself that makes you feel calm, pleasant, peaceful, strong, or resilient. Many times when I go around the world, people often say their spiritual beliefs are things that help them through very difficult times. And that's whether I'm in China and people are talking about Buddhism, or if I'm in Nepal and they're talking about Hinduism, or whether they're in different parts of the world where they're Christians, or whether they're followers of Muhammad and are Islamic. So a resource can be real or imagined. It can be internal or external. So there are some folks that say, I don't know if I can think of something. So I say, well, is there a character in a book or maybe a movie that you may call up, or someone that you admire? And then if a resource can be internal or external, what we mean about internal, sometimes we can feel like the rhythm of our heart beat, and when we feel calmer, that is an internal resource for us. Or sometimes I've heard people say, I've got strong legs, I can run miles. So that is my internal resource. Or sometimes it can be like, oh, I'm a compassionate person. And so I might say, well, as you tell me about your compassion and maybe a time that you were compassionate, what are you aware of on the inside? So then the next slide we will go to next is the different ways that we do conversational resourcing. I just told you a more like menu of how we do resourcing. But since I know that many of you are first responders, questions can be, can you tell me the moment you knew you had survived? Can you tell me the moment help arrived? Who or what is helping you the most now? I will also sometimes ask, did anyone else from your family or friendship group survive, especially when I go to the large disasters like earthquakes and typhoons, or the mass shootings that we've responded to. But also, so many people do lose people after a trauma. Can you tell me some of your meaningful memories of him or her? What did you like to do together? What kinds of words of encouragement would he say to you during difficult times, he or she or they? But also the question of, if he would have known that you were going to survive whatever the event is and he didn't, what do you think the words that he would have wanted to say to you? That has been probably one of the most meaningful things that I've asked around the world, that people have told me sacred things about the person that they've lost. And then also when we ask these questions, sometimes the person may say, what if they said it was fentanyl? We just talked about that. So we certainly don't want to reinforce it. And yet that may be what their resource is. I don't tend to run away from it. I'll say, well, can you tell me why fentanyl might be a resource for you? Well, I feel calmer. Or the withdrawal symptoms are so horrible that when I take the fentanyl, it makes me feel calmer. So what I want to do when it's a questionable resource is segue into, I wonder if there might be an organic way that you might be able to feel that same way without taking the fentanyl. We actually have a project right now at Grady Hospital in Atlanta taking a look at that, which I would love to talk to you all about at another time. So the next slide that we go into now is we're going to invite you to go into small groups. And there's going to be one of our wonderful, I always say wonderful because we have wonderful certified CRIM teachers all over the world. And we have a whole lot of them in Atlanta, thanks to Lindy Grabby and her leadership there. And many of them are going to be facilitating a small group. And we're going to ask you to write down one thing that gives you a feeling of calm, what we said about resourcing. Write down 3 details about it. Note these things about it, and then to notice what's happening in your body. And so our facilitators are going to lead you through a group exercise with this exercise. And that's what we're going to do today before our time together next time. All right. So Karina, Karina, you're going to help.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharon Grayson. I am one of the CRM teachers, and I want to invite you to turn on your video because it's always a lot more interactive when we have video. I am a nursing professor and have been involved with the CRM teaching for a little over a year now, and it has been phenomenal with my students. Nursing has always been very stressful, and to give them this type of tool to help them no matter where they are, whether they're going into a COVID room, whether they're going into a post-surgical, whatever the room that they may go in, or whether they're with their colleagues, for them to have that ability to resource prior to so that they can be in the best state for their patients and families. So I do want to invite you all to, anyone can turn off your, unmute yourself and really go through and give an example of one of your resources that you have selected that provides you joy and comfort.
Hi, Sharon, can you remind me what we were supposed to name the one thing and then list 3 things? What were the 3 things?
Yeah, you want to write down 3 details about it. And then you really want to note whether or not, what senses are you having when you think about that resource? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? What do you smell? Sometimes, and sometimes people will say, I can taste. If the resource is, I can taste my grandmother's cookies or my father's this or that, so they can taste it. So, and then as you think about, notice what's happening inside your body. And if those senses are pleasant, neutral, and you really want to stay with those pleasant feelings. And we're going to stay about 15 seconds with it. Now I'm just going to invite somebody to give an example of their of whatever they feel as a resource to them that brings them peace, joy, and comfort. Go ahead, Leslie.
Whenever possible, to be out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't do that, to imagine. And when I am outside, in almost any situation that isn't a crowded city, but particularly nature, I am hyper aware to all my senses. I hear birds, I hear the leaves rattling in the trees with the wind. I feel the wind, I feel temperature on my skin. I feel my feet on the ground and the movement, and it's almost like I just create this space, or I feel spacious. And so I have a tendency to tighten when I'm anxious or whatever, and I'll wear my, shoulders as earrings, etc. And on all my muscles just get very quiet. I move smoothly, and it's guess what? Real pleasant, pleasant feeling.
And I just want to notice that when you were talking, and you were really talking about the seeing of the leaves and hearing the birds, and that you started gesturing and it started opening up for you. And so it's that feeling of, oh, I can breathe.
Yeah.
And you also talked about, you know, when I'm anxious, I tighten up, and it allows you to release, being out in the, and that's something that you can, as you said, when you can't get out, you can imagine it.
I can.
You know, and you can almost feel it, smell it, you know, hear it, and it will bring you joy in a time when you need it, and then you can take those few moments and then go about your day and get back into that resiliency zone, and be the best person that you can be, and not be bumped in and out of it, and get some stress. So great, that's wonderful. Anyone else want to share? How about Bridget? I'm not shy. I'll call on people. I'm a professor.
Hello, I'm Bridget Quinn. So I wrote down meditation. I try and do that at least once a day. Sometimes I like doing it outside for the very reasons that Leslie mentioned. But what I wrote down with that was that it relaxes me, calms me, and not to steal Leslie's descriptive terms, but it does, it opens me up, it makes me feel more spacious. So anyway, that's what I wrote down.
Mm-hmm. And when you're feeling that, is there any part of your body that you can feel a sensation? It can be a tingling, you can feel an openness or warmth.
Yeah, very often some kind of sensation. Sometimes it will feel like, sometimes I even imagine a light that moves through my body, and it might be more a visual sense or a feeling sense at times. It depends on what's going on. But yeah, so it's just it usually is a full body sensation, whatever that is, whether it's a visual or a sense session. So
wonderful. Thank you so much, Bridget. Jan, how about you? Since you got your video on.
Hi, I'm Jan. You know,
sorry, my bad.
Well, that's all right. It's all good. You know, stealing from Leslie, the great outdoors, and I apologize for taking so long. I'm working off of like 3 different monitors. Love being outdoors, and for me, it's the disconnect from the electronic leash that my phone 24/7 I'm attached to, and I don't have the strength or power to turn off or turn down unless I leave it in another room accidentally. And I'm also a planner, so I like having. I'm a former law enforcement, so we're always about making plans and if then. And what I've discovered is that if I don't know what we're having for dinner for the week, I carry that stress and I carry it in my jaw. So as silly as it might sound, because it's a very small thing, my wife and I have found that having some idea of when we come home, we're making lasagna, we're making green chili chicken enchiladas, allows us to just kind of proceed through the rest of the day in a little smoother activity. And it's minor, but man, it sure does seem to help.
Yeah. So that food, that knowing that comfort of you've got it scheduled out, that brings you joy.
And or maybe just for me, I mean, I'm a pretty happy guy just in general. But it reduces my amount of my stress, you know. And I can tell I have some joint issue, and when my stress level starts to go up, my knees and my ankles hurt. And this last couple of weeks, I've been hobbling around borderline like on a cane. And we just kind of worked on some stress, a little bit of exercise, and I slept great last night, and I'm alive and kicking, dealing with a bunch of work issues from my other job. But it's amazing what combining food and plan and a happiness can do just for your inner core.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jan. I think we are out of time, I believe. Thank you so much. And just remember, you can use this at any time in order to bring you back into that resiliency zone. I know with students, I have to bring myself back into that resilience zone all the time, because they will bring you your problems and then you bring you their.
Oh my, I cannot believe we did this in this period of time. This is a record, Lindy Grabby, wherever you are. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lindy, for the next part. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I hope that some of you were able to experience and sense into your resource. I know my group, 3 people, were able to do it, and it was really wonderful for me even to hear. I felt calmer on the inside as they shared their resources. By the way, Jeffrey, one of my favorite places in the world is Big Sur. So my husband and I went there frequently, and of course Esalen is there, but I often just would go there because I lived in the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a wonderful image when you brought that in.
Nice. I'm
Thank
glad
you.
I switched to that.
Yes.
Lindy, I think you're on mute.
You're on mute, Lindy. Okay, there we go.
Still on mute. Well, there
Okay.
There we go.
I agree. Elaine, this was a whirlwind CRM introduction.
It was.
Yeah, just a couple slides, and then I would love to have the report out. Okay, there is an app called iChill. That's not iChill beer. You can also get it online, and that is going to be Elaine's voice. It's going over the skills, going over those resiliency zone images. Please this with anybody you like.
It's also in Spanish. It's not my voice in Spanish, but we have it in both languages now that people can listen to if you work with a Spanish-speaking population.
We have one randomized control trial, which we did with nurses at Emory. And we had a large effect size for well-being and resiliency. The nurses also had reduced secondary traumatic stress, which is like PTSD, and physical symptoms. And you can see the nurses were doing some of the CRM skills, noticing sensations of their scrubs. And they were doing it during all of these really, really difficult clinical situations. So you can't pull out a yoga mat and when you're working in the emergency room or in an ambulance, but you can sense in. And so we'll talk more about this next Monday, and I hope you'll all return and bring more of your friends, because we're going to talk about different skills. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I hope that this will be a moment where we can get the groups to report back in.
Yeah, I'll start with our group just in 20 seconds. I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity. I think as an educator, it's such a balance between providing information and providing experiences that help us connect to ourselves and other people. And I just really appreciate any moment that is provided where we can have a moment to connect to ourselves and others. So thank you. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if any of the other hub leaders from the ECHO program wanted to remark with anything from their groups or about the presentation. Also, I do want to say, I want to build on what you said, Linda, that we should all tell a friend to join in next week so we can double and aim for 200 participants, because your presentation is awesome. So thank you.
It will be different material. We'll review the resilience zone.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Well, I'm both a nurse practitioner and a clinical social worker. I just want to say thank you. It's really great to see your expertise today, and I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks, Molly. Any anyone else, the hub team or anyone out there with ideas about how you might apply this or the implications for this for anybody? What do you think, Dr. Romero, in a psychiatric emergency room? Does this have some relevance?
Absolutely. Dr. Katzman, I was just going to say, I'm already thinking about all the ways I'm going to use this in the psych emergency room and recommend the app. And this is just fantastic. This is great. And I think it's going to really help a lot of people that we see in the emergency services. So thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation.
Great. I typed in that I just downloaded the app. That was easy and it looks really great. So I'll work with it between now and next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Bessel van der Kolk has written the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
And, you know, he says, we people with complex PTSD or severe trauma need top down, which is the cognitive approach. They may need medications, but they need bottom up, which is the sensory motor approach. Yes. And, you know, that's a well-established type of psychotherapy. But what Elaine did, and this is a gift to the universe, she created a self-care model, which is really easy to teach on the spot.
I just have to add that this really, I was the Associate Director of Behavioral Sciences at Arrowhead Regional Medical Center in San Bernardino County. And I was a teacher of family medicine. And a lot of this came out of working with physicians because they were so stressed so much of the time. And I was working with the interns and the residents. They were learning medicine. And, you know, you all know those of you that are physicians, I mean, by the seat of their pants sometimes. But it's those kind of self-help skills that I could see them come back to their better self, which made their thinking clear. So that's where some of the origins of this model came from. So we also work with kids. I'd love to share more. We have so many wonderful facilitators from Atlanta who do all sorts of work, including in juvenile justice. I saw that Doug is here too, and Barbara's with a domestic violence organization. So there's been so many different derivations that people take the model and kind of bring it to different arenas. Because what I've known to be true as a licensed clinical social worker is that we had to train natural leaders of communities, whether you're a mental health professional or not. So that's part of what we've done in the world, which is why we've spread, I think, so widely. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here. And we look forward to reconnecting and tell a friend. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. And hello, all facilitators from Atlanta. It's good to see you. Hugs to all of you. Yes. My last in-person thing that I did was in Atlanta, March 13th. Bye. Ingrid, see you.
Am I supposed to be in this breakout room?
We're here. Jeff, do you want us or not?
Probably no, because we're going to have some mentorship from Dr. Everly, although we would love to be with.
Well, we were with the in crowd very briefly.
Bye.
We'll plan on a debrief with y'all's team after next week.
Yeah, maybe after next week. Was that all right?
Sounds
Great.
good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. All right. I think if we don't have any other things to check in on, we'll go straight into the mentorship session. So Jeff and Dr. Everly, I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, George and I swapped some ideas. And George, I liked your ideas about helping us to get to some, I forget what you referred to them as, core questions or core values, or I'm not remembering right.
Well, I call them maxims.
Maxims, yeah.
Even they have great variabilities. So I'd like to find out from the people that are still here, if we had this idea of the mentoring concept, what would you like to hear? What should we address? I mean, we've had this discussion in terms of the echo at the 30,000 foot level. Perhaps it's useful to apply it here. The small group. What do you want to start about that? What should we talk about?
For me, George, I feel like we're inviting quite the guests in terms of people with expertise and programs that they've developed. And I just don't know, is there something we should be doing with this information, writing about this information? It seems like quite a resource for lots of people. And I simultaneously feel like, wow, this is really cool. And at the same time, like, well, how do we get this bigger? Because it could be really helpful to so many people. So like what to do with this and how to even conceptualize where we're going. Those are kind of my wonders. Okay, so Jeff, your question is mentoring the organization. Yeah, and kind of,
okay, yeah. Fair enough. I mean, the other options we can talk, and they're not mutually exclusive, about personal roles in that journey as well. Right. But okay, that's great. Great start. How about others? What are your thoughts?
I have to admit that I'm not entirely sure, and so kind of being in this group now and thinking about that idea of mentorship, I think the whole idea of kind of mentoring the organization towards being more resilient is an important one for us. And I'm here at UNM at the hospital, but I like that idea about thinking about what as leaders, as managers, as folks that are in a position to provide some leadership to others. What are some ways to help just help bring that kind of resilience about, I think, in our organization.
Okay. And I would just add, this is Joanna. I would just add, George, we just have such a large, robust, and diverse hub team. How to maybe make even better, how to maybe kind of allow the hub team to kind of show themselves even more, kind of their strengths, beyond the leading of the breakout sessions. I mean, we only have 1 hour, but how could they be more tied into the session? I don't know, so those are just some ideas.
Okay.
A lot, I know.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, it does seem like there's, I don't know, a couple month play or something before something gets old and we need to repackage or rebrand or rethink about what we're doing. And it's almost like that's a component of resilience or something in and of itself, to not go to sleep or assume that what you've been doing is right. And I don't know how to keep track of that, or so it just, how do we stay fresh, I guess, is the question.
So
there's a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, let me just start based on what I've heard so far and a little bit of what you and I chatted about in the email. Let me just start, and if we have to go in a different direction, that's fine. So what I said, to share with the rest of you, what I said to Jeff in the email was, I do some mentoring with organizations, and I also do mentoring with individuals. Most of them are early career folks. They're assistant professors, postdocs, final stages of a residency, something like that. But in academia, they're usually assistant professors who are looking to get promoted. They want to stay in academic medicine or whatever. I've also got some, and this was interesting. I was surprised. I've got a few folks that I mentor who are extraordinarily successful. I mean, world famous and wealthy. And I kind of smiled when two different people, 2 different times, but contacted me 3 different people, 3 different times. And I said, what in the world? I should be contacting you. I mean, what? And they have their own little niche. I mean, if I told you their organizations, you would know them. If I told you their names, you may or may not know them. But if I told you their work, you would certainly know them. And what they said to me was, yeah, we're pretty much on top of our game, of our careers, of our fields. We want to stay there. And that's kind of the consonant with what you just said, Jeff. Mm-hmm. Times change. I'm a big fan of the Kardashians. Not really. Well, sort of. What I admire truly about the mother is that she capitalized on this notion, which I'd never heard before, of being famous for being famous. She created something out of, I won't say nothing because I don't mean to insult anybody, but you know what I'm saying. And how did she do that? She should be teaching marketing at Harvard Business School or advertising. And that intrigued me about all of that. And again, I remember some of the precursors to the Kardashians was I'm forgetting her name, her first name, but she will tell me. Her last name is Hilton. She's a granddaughter of Conrad Hilton.
Paris,
thank you. And she had this reality show. It wasn't particularly successful. It ran for a season or 2. And she would do all of these really dramatic or crazy kind of wacky things. And I saw an interview with her, and she let down her facade, her guard, and she said, I have to keep remaking myself. And so I've been a student of what makes people successful for over literally 50 years. And you may remember the name Hugh Hefner, a master at remaking himself over and over and over again. And so I was intrigued with that and studied those. And so again, Jeff, I think you're right. What I would like to know, one of the things that I would like to know is when we did our first resiliency class, I did, not you collectively, we had, if I remember, and Paige, I could be wrong about this, but I thought we had like 400 people attend.